Most people get the order backwards. They spend years trying to master their habits, discipline themselves into a better routine, force their way into consistency, and it never sticks, not for long. And the reason it never sticks isn't a lack of willpower, it's that they skipped a step. You cannot master something you don't actually value. And most people, if they're honest, don't value themselves nearly enough to protect the discipline it would take to change. Self-mastery isn't the starting line. It's what shows up after you've already decided you're worth the effort. The discipline that doesn't survive shame. Think about every time you've tried to build a new habit purely out of guilt or obligation. You should exercise, you should eat better, you should stop wasting time. That kind of discipline runs on shame, and shame is an unreliable fuel. It gets you moving for a week, maybe two, and then the moment life gets hard, it evaporates. Because underneath it there was never any real belief that you were worth the outcome. You were just trying to silence a voice that told you you were failing. Compare that to discipline that comes from actually valuing yourself. Not the inflated Instagram caption version of self-love. The plain, unglamorous kind. Deciding that your time matters, your body matters, your future matters, simply because it's yours. That kind of discipline doesn't run on shame. It runs on respect. And respect doesn't evaporate the second things get difficult, because it was never dependent on your mood in the first place. Why you keep abandoning yourself pounds? Here's an uncomfortable pattern worth naming directly. Most people treat themselves the way they'd never treat someone they actually valued. They'll cancel on their own workout without a second thought, but they'd never casually cancel on a friend who was counting on them. They'll talk to themselves in a tone of voice, lazy, pathetic, hopeless, that they'd never use on anyone else in their life. They'll let their own goals sit at the bottom of the priority list, underneath everyone else's requests, every single day, without ever asking why. That pattern doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from an old, quiet belief that you're not actually the priority, that your needs are negotiable in a way other people's aren't. And as long as that belief sits underneath everything you do, no amount of productivity hacks or morning routines is going to fix the real problem, because the real problem was never a scheduling issue. It was a valuation issue. You can't consistently protect something you don't believe is worth protecting. The mirror test. Here's a simple way to check where you actually stand on this. No journaling required. Think about how you'd react if someone you loved treated themselves the way you treat yourself. If they skipped meals, ran on 4 hours of sleep for a week, agreed to everything everyone asked of them while quietly resenting it, and spoke to themselves with contempt every time they made a mistake, would you call that self-discipline, or would you be worried about them? Most people, ask that question honestly, know the answer immediately. They'd be concerned. They'd tell that person they deserved better, and yet they'll walk straight back into the exact same pattern in their own life without blinking, because it's much easier to extend compassion outward than it is to turn it back on yourself. That gap between how you'd treat someone you value and how you actually treat yourself is worth closing before you try to build anything else on top of it. What valuing yourself actually looks like. This isn't about affirmations in the mirror or telling yourself you're perfect exactly as you are. Valuing yourself, in the practical sense, looks a lot like the way you'd treat a serious investment. You protect it. You maintain it. You don't let just anything or anyone drain it without a second thought. You give it your attention, not because you feel like it every day, but because you understand what it's worth over time. That means protecting your sleep, even when staying up feels more fun in the moment. It means saying no to a request that would quietly cost you something important, even if saying no feels uncomfortable. It means noticing the tone you use with yourself after a mistake, and choosing something closer to what you'd say to someone you respected, instead of the automatic pile-on most people default to. None of that requires perfection. It just requires treating yourself like someone whose time and energy actually matter, because they do, whether you've been acting like it or not. Self-worth is the foundation, not the reward. A lot of people have this backwards in a specific way. They think self-worth is something you earn after you've achieved enough. Lose the weight, hit the income goal, get the relationship, finish the degree. Then, finally, you'll have earned the right to value yourself. That order guarantees you'll never actually get there, because the goalpost keeps moving the second you get close to it. There's always a next achievement that would really prove it, and the self-respect keeps getting pushed one milestone further away. Flip the order, and something changes completely. Decide you're worth the effort first, before any of the results show up, and suddenly the actions you take toward your goals come from a completely different place. You're not proving your worth through the achievement, you're expressing a worth you already decided to believe in. That distinction sounds subtle, but it's the difference between discipline that collapses the moment results slow down, and discipline that holds steady because it was never dependent on the results in the first place. Mastering yourself starts with defending yourself. Once you actually value yourself, Self-mastery stops being a grind and starts looking more like protection. You start defending your mornings the way you'd defend something you cared about, instead of letting the first notification of the day hijack your attention. You start defending your body the way you'd defend a resource you couldn't replace, instead of treating it like something to punish or ignore, depending on your mood. You start defending your own word, the promises you make to yourself, the way you'd defend a friendship, because you understand that breaking that trust repeatedly has a real cost, even if nobody else ever finds out about it. This is where mastery over your emotions, your habits, your attention actually becomes sustainable. Not because you gritted your teeth harder than everyone else, but because you were finally defending something you decided was worth defending. Discipline without that foundation is a temporary performance. Discipline built on top of real self-worth is a lot closer to instinct. You don't have to talk yourself into protecting something you already believe matters. The people who skip this step, watch closely, and you'll notice a pattern in people who chase external success while quietly neglecting themselves internally. They can look disciplined from the outside, early mornings, packed schedules, visible hustle, while running on fumes underneath it, because the entire structure is being held up by proving something to somebody else, rather than by any real internal sense that they're worth the effort. That kind of drive tends to be brittle. It works right up until the external validation slows down or disappears, and then the whole structure loses its foundation, because there was never a floor underneath it to begin with, just a constant reach for the next thing that might finally make them feel like enough. Compare that to someone who's done the quieter work first, who values themselves independent of the applause, the followers, the promotion, the number on the scale. Their discipline looks similar from the outside, but it holds up completely differently under pressure, because it isn't tethered to an audience. It's tethered to something private and steady that doesn't disappear just because nobody's watching that particular week. Why willpower alone was never going to be enough. There's a reason so many people cycle through the same broken resolutions year after year. New gym membership in January, abandoned by March. A new productivity system every few months that never outlasts the initial excitement. It's not that these people lack willpower. Willpower was never the actual bottleneck. The bottleneck was that none of it was built on top of an honest belief that they deserved the outcome badly enough to protect it once the excitement wore off. Willpower is a limited resource on any given day. It depletes with stress, poor sleep, a hard conversation, a long commute. If your entire system for change depends on willpower alone, you're building on the least reliable material available to you. Self-worth works differently. It doesn't deplete the same way over the course of a single bad day, because it isn't a feeling you're summoning fresh each morning. It's closer to a standing decision you made once and keep returning to. That's why people who've actually done the work of valuing themselves first tend to look almost boringly consistent from the outside. They're not fighting the same battle against their own motivation every single day. They already settled the more important question a long time ago. The cost of getting the order wrong. Picture two people, both trying to build the same habit, say, showing up for their health consistently. The first person is doing it because they currently dislike what they see in the mirror and they're hoping enough discipline will eventually earn them the right to feel okay about themselves. The second person already believes they're worth taking care of, and the habit is simply an expression of that belief, not an attempt to win it. Both might start out looking identical for the first few weeks, but watch what happens the first time either of them misses a few days. Sickness, travel, a rough patch at work. The first person, whose entire effort was quietly funded by self-dislike, tends to spiral. A missed week reads as more proof of the very thing they were trying to outrun, and it's often easier to just quit than to keep confronting that proof. The second person misses the same few days and picks back up without much drama, because the missed days never had the power to threaten something that was never conditional on perfect performance in the first place. That's the practical cost of getting the order wrong. Not that you can't start, but that you can't sustain it once things get imperfect. And things always eventually get imperfect. What this actually requires of you tonight. Start with something small and specific, instead of a vague resolution to love yourself more, because vague resolutions rarely survive contact with an actual Tuesday. Pick one place where you've been treating yourself worse than you treat someone you cared about, and change exactly that one thing this week. Maybe it's the way you talk to yourself after a mistake. Maybe it's protecting 1 hour of sleep you've been sacrificing without a second thought. Maybe it's finally saying no to one request that's been quietly draining you for months. Whatever you pick, do it not because it'll make you more productive, though it likely will, but because you're deciding, deliberately, that you're worth that protection. Let the discipline follow from there instead of trying to force it in first. Master yourself, absolutely, but build it on a foundation that can actually hold the weight. Value yourself first. Everything you're trying to build on top of that becomes dramatically more stable once it's actually standing on solid ground.